Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into a little college football throwback video looking at all of the top 3 overall recruits within the last decade, 2013 to 2023, and then I'm going to give a grade based on how those 3 recruits did. We, of course, know college football recruiting, it's getting more accurate in terms of predicting the best high school players and things like that. But there were some years where we saw some major misses, and we're just going to kind of reminisce on some of these guys starting in the year 2013. We've got Robert Kimdichie receiving the perfect 1,000 overall rating. That's where you're ranked first in every recruiting site. He was actually a late first-round pick. He dealt with some real issues at Ole Miss off the field. He was part of one of those. I think, that was the 2013 class where they just blatantly cheated to get a few 5 stars. Ole Miss did. That kid was from Georgia, goes to Ole Miss, and you know what? It's tough. He ends up getting drafted maybe like 29th overall in the first round by Arizona. Maybe plays 2 games with the Cardinals. I don't think I've seen this dude in a Cardinals uniform. But he was a total bust, even though he was picked kind of as a late, high upside first round pick. The number 1 overall player being late first round pick. It's not horrible, but it's not great. And then his NFL career was not good. My guess is it was mainly off the field. I remember one of the years when Ole Miss beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa. He had a crazy breakout game, and people were talking about him being like the number 1 overall pick, but it just didn't work out. Next, we have Jalen Smith, who, of course, we remember the Ohio State Fiesta Bowl. He was guaranteed very likely be a top 5 pick. Ends up suffering that major injury. That kind of spurs the whole idea of players sitting out their bowl games, because most of the bowl games technically are meaningless because they're not for the national championship. And he did fall to the second round, but there are some common misconceptions around his overall situation. He still did get a second contract with the Cowboys. It was not a good contract for the Cowboys, but he did make over $30 million. So it was not a horrible situation. Obviously, him falling to the second round was really sad. But, going to Notre Dame, he had a really good career at Notre Dame, and he definitely would have been a top 5 pick, so that's unfortunate. And then Vernon Hargraves was a first-round pick, I believe, to Tampa Bay. Didn't play very well. So all of these 3 guys should have been first-round picks. I'm going to give, these 3, in terms of their NFL careers, they weren't good. I'm going to say a B-. I'm going to say a B- for them. Moving to 2014, you've got Leonard Fournette, who had a real polarizing college career. For like a 5-week stretch, I think his sophomore season, he was basically the best running back in college football history, if you guys remember that time period. But other than that, I think he got shut down by Alabama in Tuscaloosa and really never recovered. But he was like the overwhelming Heisman favorite. And he ended up going 4th overall to Jacksonville. Like one of the last years a running back was picked that high. Myles Garrett, the number 1 overall pick, they nailed that. And then Jabril Peppers, kind of an athlete who he probably should have been used a lot more dynamically and a lot more on offense. Actually did receive an invite for the Heisman ceremony, which really made no sense. I mean, he just did not have enough offensive stats, but he was a first-round pick to the Cleveland Browns. So all 3 of these guys were top, first-round picks. Fournette and Myles Garrett, top 5 picks. I mean, I think you got to say Myles Garrett's a superstar pass rusher. Fournette's been a decent running back. Peppers is still in the NFL. I'm going to say A- on these guys. I think they all did well in terms of their college and NFL careers. Next, we have the disaster class of 2015. Trenton Thompson, the number 1 overall player. I believe he was a 6th or a 7th round pick of the Cleveland Browns. Ivy, the offensive tackle, he might have been like a 4th round pick. And then Brian Cowart, ended up transferring to Maryland, and he got drafted by New England, I believe, in the 6th round. So none of these top 3 overall players in 2015 were even drafted in the first 5. Actually, you know what? I think Cowart was picked in the 5th round. Maybe, I don't know. I'm trying to go off memory here. But these 3 players going to SEC schools, utter disasters. Wow, just a you have to say that's an F. It is an F, no doubt. Moving to 2016, you've got another 1,000 overall player, the big defensive tackle, Rashawn Gary, who's really athletic for his size. Dexter Lawrence, who was also a first-round pick, and then Greg Little, who was an early second-round pick. I'm guessing Ole Miss. I mean, I'm not trying to pick on them, but I'm guessing there was something involved in terms of them getting him, the big offensive tackle who was picked in the second round by Carolina. Rashawn Gary, it just seemed like he never fully lived up to the hype at Michigan. Definitely is starting to break out with the Packers recently, was kind of a mid-first round pick. Dexter Lawrence never had the crazy impact you expect. How about the top two overall players, both defensive tackles? I'll say, because two of these guys were drafted in the first round, one was drafted in the second round, the college production isn't there, so I'm going to go with a B. But all three of these players were picked relatively high, and they are at least productive at the NFL level. Moving on to 2017, Jalen Phillips, the number one overall player. You've got Najee Harris, who I remember during this cycle, he was the number one overall player forever, ends at number 2, and then Cam Akers goes to FSU. He probably shouldn't have done that. That was right when FSU was starting to get really bad. Cam Akers, I believe, was originally committed to Alabama really early on in the cycle, decommits. But when it comes to Jalen Phillips, he ends up hitting the transfer portal, or was that even, maybe that was before the transfer portal, I don't know. He ends up going to Miami and being kind of a late first-round pick with the Dolphins. So he goes from the Miami Hurricanes to the Miami Dolphins. You've got Najee Harris, who was actually a first-round pick, which is really hard to do for a running back, picked, I think, 24th overall by Pittsburgh. And he's had a nice start to his career. Nothing crazy, but that Pittsburgh team doesn't really have a quarterback right now. And then Cam Akers, I believe, was a second-round pick. He had that terrible injury when he was just breaking out at the end of his rookie season, suffered that horrible injury in the offseason, didn't play at all last year, has kind of come back this year with a really bad Rams team that's completely injured. Overall, I'll say this is probably a solid B for this class. Those are three players. I think Phillips for UCLA is a total bust. I mean, he didn't do anything for UCLA, and I think that's a situation where I guess it doesn't even matter now with NIL, but you can't be, if you're a pass rusher, and you're like a lengthy dude who needs to be developed and his skills really need to be corrected, like you're just really raw, brother, you can't be going to UCLA. That's just horrible for your development. Even him going to Miami, you're going from UCLA to Miami. Is that really, I would not advise that. Go to Alabama or something, bro. I mean, just try and get developed properly, but that's just my opinion. Either way, again, I'll give it a solid B. How about two running backs in the top 3? That'll never happen again in terms of recruiting because they're trying to predict who will be like the top 2 or 3 picks in the draft. Next, we've got the Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields debate. Trevor Lawrence, the number 1 overall player. Justin Fields, number 2. Xavier Thomas, the huge bust here at number 3. But we all know Trevor Lawrence, he ended up being the number 1 overall pick. He ended up winning the national title as a true freshman. Justin Fields was great at Ohio State. For whatever reason, slipped to number 11, but is still turning into a good, developing young quarterback. So is Trevor Lawrence. And Xavier Thomas, unfortunately, again, the big bust on this list. 2 Clemson players inside the top 3. But I'll go ahead and say because, Xavier Thompson probably won't even be drafted. I think he's still in college or he's like dealing with something right now. I'll say this is like a B-. It's certainly brought up by Lawrence and Fields, but, that's a glaring weakness. I'll say B- on those 3 players there. I believe that is 2018, I want to say. Moving to 2019, Nolan Smith, who probably will be a first-round pick even with the injury he suffered, was the number 1 overall player. Kayvon Thibodeau was a top 10 pick with the Giants, and he's really started to break out. And then Derek Stingley, the number 3 overall pick. So they pretty much nailed this one in terms of the top 3. Thibodeau, unfortunately, suffering that injury as a junior at Oregon. Derek Stingley didn't even play. All these guys have gotten injured. Holy crap. Nolan Smith is injured right now. But, Stingley kind of just sat out. Thibodeau, who knows? These kids, honestly, they see they're going to be first-round picks, and they just don't even play some of the time. That's what I think Stingley did. Nolan Smith legitimately did get injured. I still think Nolan Smith will probably be a late first-round pick, although I haven't checked the mock drafts recently. And with Stingley and Thibodeau being top 10 overall picks, you're going to have to say this is at least an A. I would say right now, B+ to an A-, depending on where Nolan Smith gets drafted. Next, we've got 2020. It is Brian Bresee, the number 1 overall player that year. Probably going to be a first-round pick, even with somewhat limited production. There was definitely an expectation he was going to be a premier pass rusher in college football, and it really never developed, but I do believe he'll still be a first-round pick. Bryce Young is going to be the number 1 overall pick, I would guess. And then Julian Fleming, really a dynamic receiver who is just struggling to maintain targets and has definitely dealt with some pretty severe drop issues in terms of the second half of 2022. He would be, I guess, I'm guessing he's going to come back to Ohio State next year. I don't want to, speculate on him possibly transferring because Marvin Harrison Jr. is also going to be back next year. Julian Fleming is a guy, because of how crazy of an athlete he is. I mean, he was the number 3 overall player as a receiver. He could be a 3rd-round pick in the draft, honestly. I know he has drop issues, but he's a crazy athlete. But I do think he'll come back to Ohio State. Overall, I would say this gets a B+. Bryce Young's going to be the number 1 overall pick. Breezy's probably going to be a first-round pick, but he really didn't have that crazy production. And then Fleming right now really needs to turn it on there. Moving to 2022, this was the year, or is this 2021? So Quinn Ewers reclassifies, goes to Ohio State. We'll have to see what happens with Ewers. I would tentatively say he's probably going to be a top 10 pick, but he still needs to develop more. Corey Foreman really has not done much. I don't know if he's been injured. I have heard nothing about him. And then J.C. Latham, the offensive tackle at Alabama, he still apparently is kind of struggling, but it's young for him. So this one, I can't grade this. Right now it looks like Ewers. I would be shocked if Ewers was picked in front of Caleb Williams at this point. I think Caleb Williams is guaranteed the number 1 overall pick. He's everything the modern NFL wants in terms of a dual threat quarterback that's also accurate. Ewers might be like the number 2 overall pick, depending on if he develops properly in his junior season. Foreman really has to start turning it on for USC. He probably will. Normally, those defensive linemen don't even need great numbers, and they'll still be like top 10 picks. So I'm still pretty hopeful about the 2021 top 3. The 2022 top 3, Travis Hunter, already transferred out of Jackson State, going to Colorado now. Walter Nolan contemplated transferring out of A&M, and then Luther Burden also contemplated transferring out of Missouri. What a weird top 3 that is. And I don't have, I think Travis Hunter probably, if he's a full-time cornerback, is probably going to be a top 15 pick if he's, depending on what happens. Walter Nolan, it's a little bit harder. And then Luther Burden. And then 2023, that's this current recruiting cycle. You've got Arch Manning, who, very polarizing, might be another Quinn Ewers in terms of he's the number 1 overall player, but is he really like the number 1 overall college player? Like, really? Because, I don't know. He's really not a dual threat. He's more of a pocket passer. And, how much of it is the name, right? Some of it has to be the name. I don't know. We'll have to see. Cormali McClain, he might not even sign with Miami. I honestly think he's just waiting for the best offer. Maybe it'll be Miami. Maybe it won't be. And then Malachi Nelson. He's the next guy for Lincoln Riley. He has been a top 5 pretty much a top 3 overall player the entire cycle. So that is who. You've got 2 quarterbacks in the top 3. That doesn't really surprise me. That's kind of where the future is going in terms of that. But when it comes to the best top 3, I'm just sifting through this. It's tough. I might actually go back to depending on where Nolan Smith gets picked. If he gets picked inside the top 15, that's 3 guys inside the top 15. I know Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence was a really good top 2. But in terms of a top 3, that might be the one to beat. If all 3 of those guys go inside the top 15, that might be the best top 3 in the last 10 seasons. Other than that, you had 3 first-round picks with Fournette, Garrett, and Peppers. And honestly, that might be the best one because Fournette was 4th overall, Garrett was 1st overall. Fournette's a really solid running back. Garrett is a superstar pass rusher, one of the best pass rushers in college football. And then Jabril was a first-round pick and a starter for multiple years and is still, I believe, in the NFL, maybe with New England the last time I remember seeing him. So probably one of those classes are the best. We'll have to see what happens. But with recruiting the way it evolves, we're going to be expecting probably a quarterback to be ranked first pretty much every season, unless there's a reclassification or something crazy. I know the 2024 class already has QBs at the top, so we'll have to see what happens. But guys, that's going to do it for this little throwback video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description.